listening to the leonlagrey podcast, giving you the latest and greatest in tech, giving you the scoop, insight, and reviews, and all the information that you need to know about technology. Here's your host, leonlagrey.
Hello everybody, this is Leon here, back with another episode of the leonlagrey podcast. Now this week we're going to be doing something a little bit different. Now besides news on the news of technology, so this week, and we're going to be doing this on a weekly basis. And I'm very, very excited to get through the history of computers this week. And so today we're going to be going through the breakthroughs in mathematics and science that led through the computing age through the 20th century. And I'm very excited to talk about computers. Now, in this episode, we're going to be talking about the pre-computing age before personal computers. And I'm very excited to talk about this because there's a lot to talk about computing. Because if we have to talk about modern computing, we got to talk about how things have started before modern computing and mobile technology. And this is going to be a good time to look back how the age of electronics was before the 20th century. And I'm very, very thrilled to get onto the show talking about the pre-computing age. Let's get on it. Before the age of electronics, the closest thing to a computer was the abacus. Although strictly speaking, the abacus is actually a calculator, since it requires a human operator. Computers, on the other hand, perform calculations automatically by following a series of built-in commands called software. In the 20th century, breakthroughs in technology followed, or actually I would say allowed for a ever-evolving computing machines that we now depend upon so totally, we practically never give them a second thought. But prior to the advent of microcomputers and supercomputers, there were certain notable scientists and inventors who helped lay the groundwork for the technology that since dramatically reshaped every facet of modern life. The language before the hardware. The universal language in which computers carry out processor instructions originated in the 17th century in the form of the binary numerical system, developed by German philosopher and mathematician Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz. Excuse me for the pronunciation, the German pronunciation. The system came about as a way to represent decimal numbers using only two digits, the number 0 and the number 1. So two digits, 0 and 1. And we're going to get to it, what those mean for anyone that doesn't know the values. Leibniz's system was partly inspired by the philosophical explanations in the classical Chinese text, the I Shi, which explained the universe in terms of dualities such as light and darkness, and male and female. While there was no practical use for this newly confined system, at the time, Leibniz believed that it was possible for a machine to someday make use of these long strings of binary numbers. In 1847, English mathematician George Boole introduced a newly devised algebraic language built on Leibniz's work. His Boolean algebra was actually a system of logic and mathematical equations used to represent statements in logic. Equally important was that it employed a binary approach in which the relationship between different mathematical quantities would be either true or false, 1 or 0. So to stop the reading right here. Now, as already you guys may know how the math works. So what I was told about numbers and how calculation, what it represents. So let's just go over real quick before I get into depth on the history on computers. So we look at true as number 0, then false meaning as 1. So you got zeros and 1, which represents true and false in the world of computers and computing language. So there you go. So that's just sums up to you in a nutshell. As with Leibniz, there were no obvious applications for Boolean algebra at the time. However, mathematician Charles Sanders Peirce spent decades expanding the system, and in 1886, determined that the calculations would be carried out with electronic switching circuits. As a result, Boolean logic would eventually become instrumental in the design of electronic computers. So pretty much this, let me just put it this way, with everything that went on back then too. So you've had definitely these geniuses, the Germans and the English, these guys that I was just reading on right now. These are those bright minds right there. Pretty much this is how the early forms pretty much started. But if you look at it this way too, the abacus was pretty much the start of it too. But then later on throughout the centuries, things have developed and advanced, known as the earliest forms of computing. And pretty much all of it is done originally on mathematics. And that's where the fundamentals and things have set up to be too. I mean, and this is where I think a lot of the times you definitely have a lot of school kids, and this is where it tickles me most is that you and how they say that you mostly really need basic math to survive in the real world. True. Now, if you're going to be learning programming and software, you definitely need the algebra applications to continue on in the real world. And that's the best way to get on learning through computing. Even in today's world, you look at things like algebra 1, 2, and trigonometry. So you have all these right there. And these applications do apply. Now, if you are looking into building software, coding, yada, 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 those applications still apply today into some degree, and depends on what you're doing in a field in electronics. That's where you gotta go out. And this is one thing a lot of kids say, algebra is not gonna suit me out in the real world. Well, that's unless if you start learning computers. That's where you gotta set yourself in a good high standard for reading and studying on the math right there. That's where the most computers start out with too. And even today, these mathematical problems still apply to modern computing. So that's one thing to know, kids. Make sure to count your numbers, because in the software world, they're always going to need someone with good mathematical skills. So yeah, that's pretty fortunate for anyone that doesn't know how the math works. Now you do. So now we're going to be heading on to reading on the earliest processors. The earliest processors. The English mathematician Charles Babbage is credited with having assembled the first mechanical computers, at least technically speaking. His early 19th century machines featured a way to input numbers, memory, and a processor, along with a with a way to output the results. Baglage called his initial attempt to build the world's first computing machine the difference engine. The design called for a machine that calculated values and printed the results automatically into a table. It was to be hard cracked and would have weighed 4 tons. Whew, man, that's heavy. But Baglage's baby was a costly endeavor. More than 17,000 pounds sterling was spent on the difference engine's early development. Wow. Talking about money back then too. I mean, if you look at the costs from the earliest processors, we would have seen the difference from 17,000. I'm sure that in translation, it would have been just expensive in the U.S. costs. So probably about $18,000, or I would say about 7,500. Depends on the conversion, the way anybody look at the cost. But still, that's really high cost for the processor there. Goodness gracious. So back to it right here. More than 17,000 sterling pounds was spent on the difference engine's early development. The project was eventually scrapped after the British government cut off Baglage's funding in 1842. This forced Baglage to move to another idea, an analytical machine, which was more ambiguous in scope than its processor, and was to be used for general purposes computing rather than just arithmetic. While he was never able to follow through and built a working device, Baglage's design featured essentially the same logical structure as electronic computers that would come into use in the 20th century. The analytical machine had integrated memory and form of information storage found in all computers that allowed for branching or the ability for a computer to execute a set of instructions individuated from the default sequences order as well as loops, which are sequences of instructions carried out repeatedly in succession. Very interesting. Now, I want to just go ahead and make a full pause right here before I proceed. Now, even with today's computers, you're going to be seeing a lot of some of the same things that you've already seen in modern computers, especially with loops. This is really, if you look at it, this is no big difference from that went on from the mid to late 18th century. Plus, the one thing I would say with modern computers now is that it has become very powerful than what we've seen from the early to late 18th century. So this is such a huge development in the world of computers. So it's just incredible how we have pretty much have come far from this too. And plus, we've pretty much definitely live in an age. We've lived very privilegedly enough that all of us are able to run a computer in their own personal homes. I mean, unlike, and this is one thing I'm just kind of getting a little bit off topic here. Unlike computers back then, the computers back then, it wasn't really compact, and a lot of people may not see how the machines back in the late 18th century was, and it was just horrible to keep a computer. And computers weren't the most sexiest things to look at, and it was just this big hunk of machine that went took a lot of room. And in fact, a lot of these computers that were built back in the days, those computers took it was pretty much that can take literally the entire basement of an office building. So that's how bad computers were. Now today it's so different. So that's how different computers was back in those times. So now we're going to go and continue on from the history on here. Despite the failures to precede a fully functional computing machine, Babbage remained steadfastly undeterred in pursuing his ideas. Between 1847 and 1849, he drew up designs for a new and improved second version of his difference engine. This time, it calculated decimal numbers up to 30 digits long, performed calculations more quickly, and was simplified to require fewer parts. Still, the British government did not feel it was worth their investment. In the end, the most progress Babbage ever made on a prototype was completely 1/7 of his first design. During this early era of computing, there was a few notable achievements. The title predicting machine, invented by Scottish-Irish mathematician, physicist and engineer Sir William Thomson in 1872. It was considered the most modern analog computer 4 years later. His older brother, James Thomson, came up with a concept for a computer that solved mathematical problems known as differential equations. So another mathematical term. So a lot of these computers, like I mentioned, they were mostly big calculation machines, pretty much, as we've pretty much mentioned in this one as well, because like I said, like the all was just basically zeros and ones back then too, so it was very, very binary. So yeah, a lot of it's pretty much equation computers, but very, very different too. Okay, so back onto the story here. So where were we at here? Okay, differential equations. There we go. So he called his device an integrating machine. In later years, it would serve as the foundation for systems known as differential analyzers in 1927. Ooh, a long time. American scientist Vannevar Bush started development on the first machine to be named as such and published a description of his new invention in a scientific journal in 1931. Wow. So we have already gone through enough reading right here too. So this is like I said, this is how everything all started. And this is how things have come to fruition and with the earliest days of computing. And so my comments on this is that, a lot of these computers we're so old school now, and that, this is something that they're not in no way operational anymore because they're in no good use. I mean, you look at today, everyone has a desktop, a laptop, or a mobile phone. And there's something that I was listening to, that the iPhone has more processing power than the Apple II. And that right there, this is not hard to believe. I mean, this is quite the truth. I mean, your phone has more processing power than the older computers back 40 years ago. And you're talking about those old school computers just has a whole different way of having such a powerful processor now, even especially Android. You look at the Android phones, it has more processing power than any of the previous processors combined 40 to 50 years ago, or even earlier than that too. And so this is great, great stuff right here. And so for right now, I'm going to go ahead and put the story onto the pause and want to give you the concept on early computing and the invention of computers. So that's where I want to go ahead and make a stop for right now. And from here, we're going to go ahead and continue on reading the 20th century, the dawn of modern computers, which is going to be on something I'm going to be talking about further on by next week. Anyways, folks, I hope you've enjoyed this lesson. I will be continuing on the history of computers by next week, and I do hope that you guys continue to stay here on the History Computers. So part 2 is going to be another recording till next week. So again, thank you all for coming in. Have yourselves a great week. Peace and enjoy. Hello guys, thanks for listening into the leonlagrey podcast. And if you enjoyed the content that you are hearing today, please be sure to follow up on the leonlagrey podcast, wherever podcast service of your choice that you listen to on. And also, another thing I want to just mention is that I update my newsletters each and every week, so that way every one of you can keep up to date when I go live, when I post new blogs each and every week. So that's something I do every single day, and I'm very much active on blog postings and in podcasting each and every week. And also, I don't know if everyone is very much inclined to putting a rating on iTunes, Podchasers, or any podcast service of your choice. That way, if any of you do rate me, that will help me climb the charts of iTunes or Google Podcasts or wherever it is that you listen to me on. That will help me a lot from here too. So doesn't hurt to put a simple review and just letting everybody know what you think about the podcast. Anyways, folks, thanks again for coming in and stopping by listening to the show. You guys have a great week.